to In the Footsteps of Politics, the show which aims to take the broadest view of politics and people's lives. We will talk to some of the most interesting people about how they got to where they are, their successes and their failures. We'll talk to politicians, activists, writers, artists, and anyone with something of value to say. If they want to talk about their personal politics, they're absolutely welcome to, but in general it's a broader conversation, more interest in the intersection of politics and policy and where politics actually matters for the people. I'm Peter Newman, your podcast host. I've been a teacher, a journalist and a political candidate for over 20 years, and now I'm here to welcome you to go in the footsteps of politics. Hello and welcome to another edition of In the Footsteps of Politics. This is actually the first edition of the podcast alone for quite some while. I've been diverted doing other things and I have struggled to arrange a time with my guest through various things going on in both of our lives. I am absolutely delighted to welcome Thomas Leakey, who is going to talk to us all about the politics and trials and tribulations, really, of running an arts organisation, particularly in the Highlands. So, Thomas, welcome. Thank you ever so much for joining us on In the Footsteps of Politics. I hope you're well.
It's great to be with you, Peter, and thanks for having me on.
I'm so delighted that you're coming. So the thing that kind of sparked my request behind getting you on was Thomas is part of a group called the Marler Players, or in fact the leader and originator of the Marler Players, but they are staging a very special production this year. I wonder if you'd like to tell the audience about your Wagnerian extravaganza.
Absolutely, yes. So at the end of next month, at the end of May, we're putting on two complete performances of Wagner's final work, Parsifal. So we've previously performed the second act and the third act sort of in isolation, and now we're tackling the whole thing on the 27th and the 31st of May. I said March earlier, I meant May.
I think you did actually say May. It's okay. So, I mean, Parsifal, okay. I believe you did actually tell me that Parsifal's not been performed in the UK for, you think it's about 23 years. Is that right?
Yes, it was performed by Scottish Opera in the year 2000. And then a couple of years later, either 2002 or 2003, it was performed at the Edinburgh Festival with I think it was the Gustav Mahler Jugendorchester and Claudio Abbado conducting, but to our knowledge, since then it's not been performed in full. So it's very exciting to do it now after such a long time. I mean, 2002, 2003, I was very much still in school, and it feels like a very long time ago. So it's a bit overdue, I think, to have a Parsifal in Scotland.
I mean, that is really exciting. Do you have an opinion as to why it hasn't been performed for so long?
Well, I think putting on a Wagner opera is a huge undertaking for anyone. Very costly, of course, very time-consuming. The performances themselves are, it's almost 6 hours, our performance. That includes the interval time. So it's a huge operation, very complex to do, and I think that's got a lot to do with it. And well, in fact, Scottish Opera put on Tristan and Isolde just a couple of months ago. So it shows that it can be done, but it is a big undertaking, and certainly not for the faint-hearted to make it happen.
I imagine viewers, listeners of this show, if they're not Wagnerians, will probably know Ride of the Valkyries. It would be the kind of usual access point for Wagner opera fans. Would that be right, do you think?
Yes, I think so. The Ride of the Valkyries, as you say, other excerpts like the wedding music from Lohengrin, perhaps. I think people know the Tristan Prelude and Liebestod. So Wagner is known quite often in terms of excerpts, and people don't necessarily know the full opera behind that. And I think more widely, I think a lot of people, well, everyone hears Wagner's influence all the time, basically, even if they don't know Wagner, because he's pretty much the originator of what now would be film music. And even the idea of the darkened auditorium, which we would have when we go to the cinema, that was his idea. And so much film music that we hear now is very much still influenced by him. I mean, for instance, if you take something like Lord of the Rings, Howard Shore, fantastic score and in its own right, but very much influenced by Wagner for sure. And more recently, Joe Hisaishi, for example, his music, often you can hear that Wagnerian influence there. So people, although they might not have heard a full opera, or they might not know exactly what it is, his influence is everywhere. So it's wonderful now to be able to actually perform a full work of his.
Yeah, I mean that's incredible. I had no idea that was true. That's so interesting. So I suppose we should actually tell people Richard Wagner was born in 1813 in Leipzig, German composer, SAS director, died in 1883, and so is very much kind of that 19th century period of music. But let's come back to the 21st century and talk about the Mahler players. So obviously, staging this huge production. How many musicians? How many singers? Obviously, you said it's going to take 6 hours. I believe from your marketing, there's going to be a break for dinner, which seems remarkably civilized. Tell me about the actual production and the backstage.
Yes, well, in the orchestra, there are about 40 players. We have around 25 in our chorus. And then the soloists, there are 6 principal soloists, and then a number of smaller roles as well. And the singers singing the smaller roles are also taking part in the chorus. And then behind the scenes, there are a lot more people involved as well. So we're probably talking at least 80 people who are directly involved in this production, which is a first for us, I think. I mean, we started very small. The first thing we ever did when we were a tiny chamber ensemble, there were only about 7 of us. So it's gradually expanded over the years, and this is a bit of a high point, and it's certainly quite complex to do. There's no doubt about that, but very rewarding as well.
I mean, if you don't mind, what's your background? You're from Inverness. For those who are in the Highlands, most people will know Leakey's Bookshop. So Thomas's name tends to carry a literary association, and his backdrop is then reinforcing that very nicely today. So, how did you get interested in music? What was your route into this?
Yes, well, I grew up here near Inverness. I went to school here. I started with music relatively late, I think. I mean, I started the trombone when I was about 12. And then I took up the piano a few years after that when I was almost 16, which is quite a late age to start as a musician. I then went off to study something completely different, natural sciences at university, but I kept the playing going very much while I was doing that, particularly the trombone playing in orchestras. And while I was at university, I started conducting quite randomly. Really, there was just an email that went out for the college orchestra. They needed a conductor, and I thought, well, why not give it a try, And so that went quite well, and I decided that, well, let's give this a try more seriously. Did some master classes, some courses, for instance, with George Hurst and Denise Ham at the Sherborne Summer School this would have been about 2011. And then I sort of realized that, well, you need to practice being a conductor. You need to do that. You need to actually get in front of players. It's all very well going along to master classes and things, but you have to make that happen somehow. And well, there are different ways of doing it, but certainly one of them is setting up your own group. And because I had a lot of connections here from when I grew up, the teachers, instructors, and so on, this felt like an ideal place to do that. Also because I felt there was a gap for it here. There was definitely a lot of fantastic musicians around and scope for them to play together more than they were doing at that time. So we set up an educational project with Stravinsky's The Soldier's Tale, which is a piece for 7 players and 3 actors and 1 dancer, and that was a lot of fun. It was look back on that very fondly, and then we sort of did that and became aware that there were a lot of arrangements of Mahler's music. Gustav Mahler, the 19th century, early 20th century composer, and a lot of arrangements of his music, which was originally written for huge symphony orchestra. Usually, there were these chamber arrangements for about 14 or 15 players, which existed. So that's what we did next. We did the 4th symphony, and then there was this whole row of pieces by Mahler which you could do in this reduced orchestration. So that's why we decided to call ourselves the Mahler Players. Not necessarily the most original name, but it described certainly what we were doing at that time. And then that gradually evolved the orchestra over the years, because it's been going for quite a while now, but this is our 13th year. And the orchestra gradually attracted more players. It got more of a reputation. More people wanted to come and play. And at the same time, also audiences started becoming aware of us more. The public grew, more people basically connected with the orchestra coming along, and that's sort of a gathering momentum, which took a while. I mean, it's really up until about 2013, up to maybe around 2020, it was certainly ticking along, but since then it's taken off more, and we've really evolved from being initially, I suppose, a small chamber ensemble into a large chamber ensemble, into a small chamber orchestra, and now I suppose a large chamber orchestra is what you might describe us as, bordering on a symphony orchestra for some of the projects. So it's got a great momentum to it, and I think the people who are involved in it, whether that's as players or singers, we have a chorus who join us sometimes for some projects, and also the soloists who've joined us from across the world, have a real affection for the group and what we do, and that's something that we've built up gradually over the years.
So you've built relationships and maintained them with, and now it's kind of networking out across the world. That's fascinating. So let's do the kind of slightly the bit where we all get slightly squeamish. What do you do about fundraising? Are you paying people for their work? Are they all volunteers? How does that work?
Well, it varies from project to project. I mean, principally, it's we always pay travel expenses for people, and then whether we pay fees varies. Typically, it's a voluntary thing, and sometimes it isn't, depending on if we can get enough funding for that. So the way we get funding is, well, a combination of different things really is the only way to do it. So we have some public funding, for instance, from the Inverness Common Good Fund, are supporting this project. We have been supported in the past by organisations like Creative Scotland. So that's one part of it, and then we've got trusts and foundations. We apply, like pretty much all arts groups, to trusts and foundations and pick up little bits of funding. There we have a corporate sponsor, HRI Monroe Architecture, and they're a long-standing supporter of ours. And then we have a network of private supporters of the orchestra. And I would say, particularly for this project, that is the most important part. That is what is making this possible. So very generous private individuals, some of whom want to remain anonymous, who are supporting this to make it happen. So in a sense, we're we're a little bit closer to the US model in some ways, where their arts is generally much more privately funded and there's less public funding around. And for us, although in theory there's public funding around, that's often quite difficult to get access to. So we tend to be more privately funded.
I can't think of a time in my life when the arts organisations in general haven't been struggling for money. I can't remember a time when funding was abundant, but I also can't think of a time when it's been harder, from what I read and hear, for arts groups to raise funding. Does that tally with your experience? Is this a particularly bad time?
Well, yes, I think it's particularly difficult with public funding. I mean, it's sort of a yes and no, because we've gradually expanded, and what we're doing now is requiring more funding than anything that we've ever done before, and we have largely managed to be successful in that. So I think we're exceptionally lucky with as I said, with the private individuals who want to support us. But in terms of getting public funding, I would say that has got more difficult. We were successful in the past with Creative Scotland, for instance, who are the main public funder of arts in Scotland, and that is, I think it's more difficult now, and it's hard to say whether that's because there's more competition or they've got less funding available, or their way of looking at who should get funding has changed. I think it's possibly a combination of all three of those things.
Mm-hmm. How would you, how do you feel the art scene in the Highland is at the moment? I understand that obviously on an individual project that's and the Creative Scotland funding is obviously stands alone, doesn't it, each time? So it's kind of difficult to draw generalizations, but the existence of the Marler players and the fact that, as you've said, it's kind of grown and expanded and all the rest of it, do you think that kind of shows that there is a real appetite for this stuff up here?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think there is a real hunger for it, and we found that, I suppose, in terms of the numbers who are coming along, but also what we hear from them, because people often get in touch and say how much it means to them that we're doing this, how glad they are that we're doing it, because I think there's a bit of a shortage of similar things happening, in terms of high quality classical music and opera, and there are visits of the great orchestras from the national companies. They do visit, and it's very welcome when they do, but it's not all that frequent. I think it's difficult for them to visit because it's the travel and the complexity of getting everyone up here. But I think that what we provide is a really good supplement to that, and it means that audience members do have the chance to have a fairly full program of activities, of concerts to go to throughout the year. So we tend to do 3 or 4 different projects per year, and I think that fits in quite nicely with everything else that's on offer.
Yeah, so
it feels like I think there is a hunger for it. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, for people that don't know, in some ways that kind of arts and theatre aspect is somewhat dominated in the Highlands by Eden Court, which is the theatre and event space in Inverness, and it certainly dominates the kind of cultural scene. One of the things that the Marler players have done, in my opinion, quite interestingly, is they've taken it to other venues. So you've actually used quite an interesting sort of set of venues for your things. I was wondering, like, what kind of led you to that?
Well, initially we toured to quite a wide variety of venues right across the Highlands. So we played in Dornoch, for instance. Dornoch Cathedral is a lovely venue. The MacPhail Centre across the Nullapool. We went across to Elgin. since the orchestra's expanded, we've done less of that simply because it's some of the venues are too small just to fit us in now, and just the complexity of getting people there and the restrictions in a way on when we can perform. We kind of centered around weekends pretty much, so we can do 2 performances typically of any program, and we found that the Inverness Cathedral and Strathpeffer Pavilion are the 2 venues for us that they're our favorite venues, and they have the best combination of acoustic, which is very important because the acoustic that you play in makes a big difference, obviously, to the audience, but also to the players for their enjoyment of taking part in that, which is important as well. And the combination of that with the size of the venue fits quite well. We can pretty much fill those venues, and they're adequate in that sense, and they provide a good, decent geographical spread because people can come to Inverness, or if they're based further over west, it's easier to get to Strathpeffer, or if you're a little bit further north, that's a slightly easier venue to get to. So I think it's quite a good balance, having pretty much settled in these 2 venues, and people start to know us there, and it becomes a bit of routine to it, rather than each time trying to go somewhere completely new.
Yeah, it's another opportunity to build up those relationships we were talking about before, isn't it? The Parsifal is going to be at Inverness Cathedral, isn't it, on the 27th and the 31st of May?
That's correct. Yes. Yeah.
So that's rather exciting, and I'm assuming that the acoustics on that must be absolutely brilliant in that cathedral. It's quite a building.
Yes. Well, it depends. It depends on what you're playing. There are certain types of music for which it wouldn't be so suitable, but I think for Parsifal, the combination of the acoustic and just the setting of the cathedral is ideal, and the cathedral, it provides it's very resonant, as most cathedrals are, but without being so resonant as to completely lose the clarity. So it gives you a real warmth to the sound, and it's such a stunning setting as well. And for Parsifal, a lot of Parsifal takes place essentially in a temple, and it's just ideal for that. You've got the pillars, you've got the choir, you've got the high altar, you've got everything that is in there in the cathedral, and it's quite fitting for this work. Although it's slightly ironic because Wagner initially, when he wrote Parsifal, he insisted that it would only be performed in Bayreuth, in the Festspielhaus in Bayreuth, which was the theatre that he built in 1876, which was where The Ring was premiered, and then Parsifal was premiered there in 1882. And he felt that this work should only be performed there. And until the copyright ran out, which was, I don't know, 30 or 40 years, it was only performed there. I think other than one rogue performance at the Metropolitan Opera before the copyright had run out. But I think nonetheless, even though he wanted it to be performed in Bayreuth, I think doing it here in Inverness Cathedral gives another angle as well that's very much worth having. And of course, it means people don't have to travel to northern Bavaria to hear it. They can hear it right here in the Highlands.
That does make it a little more accessible if you're based in the Highlands, for sure. I was just wondering. So Wagner is obviously. I mean, it's interesting because obviously this is primarily a politics show, although it's really about politics in that kind of wider sense. But obviously, Wagner is now seen as quite a controversial character. His politics were, at least adopted, it's fair to say, by the Third Reich. And he was certain that there was certainly an intent to sort of link him to that regime. And so I wondered whether you'd had any kind of social media sort of pushback about things like that.
I wouldn't say we've had social media pushback. No, there are certainly people who don't like Wagner, and they're not shy to say so, or they don't like Wagner's music. But I think what you refer to is important to be aware of, for sure, if you're an artist who's working on Wagner, that he was he had many reprehensible views as an individual. There's no doubt about that, and most profoundly was his anti-Semitism, which was really horrible. And when you read the things he wrote on that subject, it is quite distressing in a way, as someone who loves the music, and you have to come to terms with this these two elements there. And I think as an artist, you have to think about that. You shouldn't just forget about it completely. But for me, it comes down to that separating him as an individual and the art that he created, and it would be such a tragedy if these extraordinary works that he produced for the world would be somehow not heard because of elements of his views which we would find appalling. So yes, and then there's also as you say, as he was sort of he was taken up then by the Third Reich, of course, many years after his death.
I was going to say, yeah, he'd been dead 40 years before. Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, he gets a pass on that one.
But it's an interesting question. But we've not really. I wouldn't say we've had significant pushback on that. But I think it's certainly worth being aware of. I mean, the thing about Wagner is that he was, particularly late in his life, he was regarded as he was a sort of celebrity. He was one of the first intellectual celebrities in Europe, and a lot of people knew all about Wagner and his politics and his views before they'd even heard a note of his music. And as he got older, he was surrounded by people who pretty much worshipped him. And I think he got a bit of I don't know what the word would be, but an idea that he was a genius in every respect. But the fact is, he was a genius as a composer and as a dramatist. And it sort of ends there. I mean, he would pontificate on all sorts of subjects, often quite tediously. If you read his writings, they're often, very difficult to get through. They're just so hard to read. And I think he had this sort of messiah complex that he thought, well, because people listened to what he said, and he had these disciples, he could come out with any old rubbish, and it would be sort of no one would contradict him. But that aside, what he achieved musically and dramatically, I think, is completely unparalleled in the whole history of the world, pretty much. And he's extraordinary in that respect.
And so often beauty and ugliness rub shoulders, don't they? In truly kind of creative, geniuses. They're often very unpalatable. I mean, Hemingway, you wouldn't want to have been married to Hemingway, but it doesn't detract from his writing. All of those kind of. Wagner may have been the first kind of public intellectual in that sense, but he wouldn't be the first person for whom fame has gone right to their heads and kind of distorted their I say it, therefore it must be of value. So he's probably far from that.
Indeed, yes. No, there are, yeah, absolutely. And he's, like any human being, he's incredibly complex. He's got so many different facets to his personality and his life. It's incredible richness to it. And he had very, he was in many ways kind and generous in some respects as well. So, but ultimately, what he's left us in his musical legacy is just so life-changing for so many people that it's absolutely worth continuing with, I think.
Yeah, well, definitely. And so, how are rehearsals going? How is the production proceeding? How are we getting on? You're still upright at the moment, so that must be a good start.
Yes, it is. Yes, rehearsals are going very well. We've started with the orchestra and with the chorus, and it's musically it's shaping together really well, actually. And it'll be exciting for us to revisit Acts 2 and 3 because we performed them already. And in a sense, the fact that we've done that is the reason why we're able to do this whole performance. It would be very difficult for us to do something like this from scratch. So it's a huge job logistically. There's no doubt about that. So many different elements to try and fit together. And we're a small team, very small team. So yes, it's certainly not without risk. This whole business, you know, there are things which could, you know, we don't always have a clear path that we can see, but it's we've made a very good start musically, and I'm looking forward to continuing with that. And fundamentally, we've got such a great team in terms of the orchestra, the chorus, and then the soloists who are joining us, that we're just so lucky to have these people, this lineup of people who are absolutely committed to what we're doing. They love it. You know, if they didn't love it, they wouldn't be there, basically. And it's a real thrill for us to do this all together, and these people who are absolutely dedicated to what they're doing, and it's and many of them who've been doing it for many years. With the soloists, we have Sir John Tomlinson singing the role of Gurnemanz, which for me is a real dream. Well, for everyone who gets the chance to hear it, it will be very special. But I actually, my first proper introduction to Wagner, or the first time I was really moved by Wagner, was when I went to hear Sir John singing the role of Gurnemanz at English National Opera back in, I think it was 2011, in the production there. And that was my first time hearing a live Wagner opera. I'd listened to recordings and things before, and yeah, I don't think I'd been quite convinced by it yet. I didn't quite get it, you know. And I thought, well, I'll go along to this performance